Hong Kong, 1967. A small dojo, tucked between the narrow streets of Kowloon. The kind of place where reputation is built in silence, where every movement is watched, every claim is tested. Bruce Lee is in the center of the room, not performing, not demonstrating, just teaching. His students are focused. The air is thick with discipline. This is not a place for spectacle. This is a place for truth. Then the door opens. Sammo Hung walks in. Already known. Already respected. A stuntman with weight, power, and years of experience in the Hong Kong film industry. He's not here to challenge anyone. He's here to train. But his presence shifts the room. He's bigger than Bruce, heavier. And in martial art circles, that difference matters. The conversation begins casually. Talk of leverage, grappling, body mechanics. Someone mentions weight advantage. Sammo, without ego, without threat, simply states, "I'm heavier." A fact, nothing more. Bruce Lee doesn't argue. He doesn't smile. He doesn't explain. He stands. He walks toward Sammo. The students step back. Not because they expect a fight, but because they recognize the shift. Something is about to be shown. Sammo doesn't move. He's curious, maybe even confident. Bruce adjusts his stance, one hand beneath Sammo's center. A pause. Then Sammo Hung is in the air, completely suspended, held still, not thrown, not struggled against, just lifted, controlled, one arm. 8 seconds. The room doesn't erupt. It freezes. No one speaks. No one moves. Because what they just witnessed wasn't strength. It was something else. Something that couldn't be explained with muscle or size. Bruce lowers him, steps back, returns to teaching. And in that silence, legend was born. This is what the witnesses remember. The story begins where most legends do, in a place no one was paying attention to. Portland Street, Kowloon, 1967. A cramped neighborhood where the streets smelled like rain, fried dough, and motor oil. The dojo was on the second floor of a building that had seen better decades. No sign outside, no advertisements. If you knew about it, you were supposed to be there. If you didn't, you weren't. Inside, the room was simple. Wooden floors worn smooth by years of footwork. Walls painted white, now faded to gray. A single ceiling fan turning slowly, doing nothing against the heat. No banners, no certificates. No photographs of masters from distant mountains. Just space. And in that space, Bruce Lee. He wasn't performing. He wasn't lecturing. He was teaching the way a craftsman teaches, quietly, precisely, without wasted motion. His students stood in loose formation, most of them stuntmen and actors from the Hong Kong film industry. They didn't joke around. They didn't check the time. When Bruce moved, they moved. When he stopped, they stopped. This was not a dojo for beginners. The afternoon session had been running for 2 hours. Footwork drills, sensitivity exercises, leave sparring at half speed. Then the door opened, and the room shifted. Not dramatically. Just aware that Sammo Hung stepped inside. He was 25. Already respected. Already known. A stuntman who'd worked on dozens of films. A choreographer who understood timing, weight, and impact. He was built like a barrel, shoulders wide, arms thick, legs rooted. When he moved, the floor felt it. Bruce glanced toward the door, nodded once, and continued teaching. Sammo didn't interrupt. He found a spot along the wall and sat, watching in silence. But his presence was impossible to ignore. He was heavier than Bruce, broader. In a world that still measured martial artists by size and raw power, That difference mattered. The students felt it. The tension wasn't hostile. It was magnetic. Two different kinds of strength in the same room. When the drills ended, a few students lingered. Sammo stood, stretched his shoulders, and walked over. The conversation started easy film work, fight, choreography, how to make a punch look real without breaking someone's face. Then someone mentioned leverage, how smaller fighters survive against bigger opponents, how positioning changes everything. The talk was casual, theoretical until Sammo, leaning back against the wall, said it, not loud, not aggressive, just honest. I'm heavier. And the room stopped. There are moments in every room where silence carries more weight than sound. This was one of them. Sammo's words hung in the air, not as a challenge, not as a boast. Just a statement, a fact. He was heavier. Everyone in that room knew it. Bruce knew it. The students knew it. In traditional martial arts circles, weight was still currency. It meant stability. It meant power. It meant you were harder to move, harder to control. And Sammo Hung had plenty of it. Bruce Lee didn't react immediately. He didn't smile. He didn't argue. He stood there, hands loose at his sides, his eyes calm. The kind of calm that doesn't come from confidence alone. It comes from certainty. One of the students shifted his weight, glancing between Bruce and Sammo. Another crossed his arms. The air felt different now, not tense, but charged. Like the moment before a demonstration no one asked for, but everyone wanted to see. Bruce tilted his head slightly, considering. Then he spoke. Weight matters, he said. His voice was even, measured. But only if you know how to use it. Sammo nodded. He wasn't offended. He was curious. He'd worked with Bruce before. He knew the man didn't speak in theory. Everything Bruce said, he could show. Bruce stepped forward. Not quickly, not aggressively, just deliberately. Stand up, he said. Sammo pushed himself off the wall and stood in the center of the room. He wasn't bracing himself. He wasn't preparing for a fight. He was just standing, relaxed, open, waiting to see what Bruce had in mind. The students formed a loose half circle around him, instinctively giving space. No one spoke. No one moved. This wasn't a sparring match. It wasn't a contest. It was something else, something quieter, more surgical. Bruce walked a slow circle around Sammo, studying him, not sizing him up like an opponent, observing him like a problem to be solved. Where the weight sat, how the balance distributed, where the leverage points were hidden. Then Bruce stopped, directly in front of him. Don't resist, Bruce said softly. Just let me show you something. Sammo nodded. Bruce lowered his stance just slightly. His right hand moved beneath Sammo's center, palm open, fingers spread. His left hand adjusted Sammo's posture, tilting him forward by a fraction of an inch. It looked like nothing, like a minor adjustment, but everyone in that room felt the shift. Bruce's breathing steadied, his legs coiled, and then Sammo Hung left the ground. Not thrown, not shoved, lifted. One hand beneath him, controlled, suspended, his feet dangling 6 inches off the floor, his body completely still, not because he was frozen in shock, but because there was no imbalance to react to. Bruce had found the exact point where Sammo's weight became irrelevant. 8 seconds. That's how long Sammo stayed in the air. And in those 8 seconds, everything the students thought they understood about strength changed. There are moments that break the rules of memory, moments so strange, so impossible, that everyone who witnessed them remembers them exactly the same way. No exaggeration, no embellishment, just the raw, undeniable fact of what happened. This was one of those moments. Sammo Hung was in the air, not flying, Not falling, just suspended, his body parallel to the ground, held up by Bruce Lee's single outstretched arm. The hand was open, fingers spread wide beneath Sammo's torso, supporting the full weight of a man who outweighed Bruce by at least 40 pounds. And Sammo wasn't struggling. That was the part no one expected. He wasn't trying to break free. He wasn't flailing or shifting his weight. He was completely still. Not because he'd given up, but because there was nothing to fight against. Bruce had positioned him so perfectly, so precisely, that resistance would have been pointless. The students stared. No one cheered. No one gasped. They just watched, frozen, trying to process what their eyes were telling them. This wasn't a trick. There were no wires, no hidden platforms, no clever camera angles. This was physics, leverage, timing, and something else. Harder to name. Bruce's face showed no strain. His breathing was steady. His legs were planted, but not locked. His shoulders were relaxed. He wasn't using brute force. He was using structure. His entire body aligned in a way that turned Sammo's weight into something manageable, something controllable. 1 second. 2. The ceiling fan above them kept turning. Outside, the street noise continued. Vendors shouting, motorbikes rattling past. But inside that dojo, time had stopped. 4 seconds. 5. Sammo's eyes were open. He wasn't panicking. He was analyzing. Even in the air, even in this absurd position, his mind was working. He could feel it now, the angle of Bruce's hand, the way his own center of gravity had been redirected, the economy of effort in every part of Bruce's posture. This wasn't strength. This was understanding. 6 seconds. 7. Bruce shifted his weight slightly, adjusting. Not to show off, just to ensure control. Sammo remained perfectly still. The two of them looked like a statue, a freeze frame of something that shouldn't be possible. 8 seconds. Then Bruce lowered him, slowly, carefully. Sammo's feet touched the floor. His knees bent slightly as he absorbed his own weight again. Bruce stepped back, his hand returning to his side. His expression hadn't changed. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just waited. Sammo stood there for a moment, blinking. Then he nodded, not in defeat, not in embarrassment, in recognition. He'd just learned something he couldn't unlearn. The dojo remained silent. Not the silence of shock, not the silence of disbelief. The silence of witnessing something that required no explanation, something that spoke for itself. Bruce Lee stood in the center of the room, hands at his sides, breathing normal. He didn't look proud. He didn't look satisfied. He looked the same way he had 10 minutes earlier, focused, present, unremarkable. As if lifting a man with one hand was no different than demonstrating a wrist lock or correcting a stance. Sammo Hung rolled his shoulders, testing his own body. He felt fine. No pain, no discomfort. Just the lingering sensation of being held in a position that shouldn't have worked. His mind replayed the moment, the angle of Bruce's hand, the shift in his posture, the way his weight had been neutralized before he even realized it was happening. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. The students remained where they were, still arranged in that loose half circle. A few exchanged glances. One of them opened his mouth as if to ask a question, then thought better of it. Another shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his arms still crossed, his expression distant, like someone trying to solve a puzzle they hadn't been given all the pieces to. Bruce turned toward the corner of the room where a wooden chair sat near the wall. He walked over, picked up a towel draped across the backrest, and wiped his hands. Casual, unremarkable. Then he turned back to the group. Leverage isn't about size, he said quietly. It's about position, timing, structure. If you understand the body's mechanics, weight becomes irrelevant. His tone wasn't instructional. It wasn't a lecture. It was just ... observation, the way someone might comment on the weather. Sammo nodded slowly. He understood now. Not intellectually, he'd always understood leverage in theory, but experientially, he'd felt it. And that feeling would stay with him. Bruce gestured toward the door. That's enough for today. The students bowed. One by one, they filed out. No one spoke. No one lingered to ask questions or discuss what they'd seen. They moved like people leaving a temple, quiet, reflective, aware that something sacred had just occurred. Sammo was the last to leave. He paused at the door, glanced back at Bruce, and gave a single nod. Bruce returned it. Nothing more needed to be said. When the door closed, Bruce sat down on the wooden chair and stared at the floor for a moment. Not in thought, not in meditation, just ... present, the way he always was. The students descended the narrow staircase in silence. One of them finally spoke when they reached the street. Did that just happen? No one answered, because they all knew it had. And they all knew they'd never forget it. 3 days passed before Sammo Hung spoke about it. Not publicly, not in interviews, just in quiet conversations with people he trusted. Stuntmen, coordinators, fellow martial artists who understood the language of movement and force. He didn't describe it as a loss. He didn't frame it as embarrassment. He talked about it the way a student talks about a lesson, with respect, curiosity, and a strange kind of gratitude. I didn't feel overpowered, he said once, sitting in a dim tea house in Wan Chai. I felt repositioned, like my body stopped belonging to me for a moment. And when it came back, I understood something I hadn't before. The person across from him, a fellow stuntman, leaned forward. What did you understand? Sammo paused, choosing his words carefully. That strength is a starting point, not the finish line. It wasn't a philosophical statement. It was practical, tactical. Sammo had built his career on his body, his weight, his power, his ability to absorb impact and deliver it back. He was good at what he did, one of the best. But Bruce had shown him a ceiling he didn't know existed. And once you see a ceiling, you can't unsee it. In the weeks that followed, Sammo began adjusting his approach, not drastically, not obviously, but those who worked closely with him noticed. His choreography became sharper, more efficient, less reliant on brute force, more focused on timing and angles. He started asking different questions during rehearsals. Where's his weight? He'd say, watching 2 actors spar. Where's the imbalance? He began teaching his stunt teams about leverage points, how a hand placed slightly to the left could collapse an opponent's structure, how a shift in footing could redirect momentum without effort. It wasn't Bruce Lee's system. It was Sammo's interpretation of what he'd learned in those 8 seconds. And it worked. His fight scenes became more believable, more dynamic. Audiences couldn't explain why, but they felt it. The movements looked real because they were built on principles that were real. Years later, when Sammo became a director, he'd return to that moment in interviews. Not often, not loudly, but when asked about the most important lessons in his career, he'd mention it. Bruce taught me that the body is a puzzle, he'd say. And if you understand the puzzle, size doesn't matter. Weight doesn't matter. Only understanding matters. He never said it bitterly. He never said it with regret. He said it the way someone speaks about a turning point, because that's what it was. Before that day, Sammo Hung was a talented stuntman. After that day, he was something more. Legends don't announce themselves. They grow, quietly, in the spaces between conversations, passed from one person to another, refined through repetition, until one day they stop being stories and become something closer to truth. The incident in the Portland Street Dojo was never recorded. No cameras, no journalists, no official documentation. Just a handful of students who happened to be in the room that afternoon in 1967. But they remembered, and when they spoke about it years later, decades later, they all told the same story. The same details, the same 8 seconds, no exaggeration, no embellishment. Just the quiet, undeniable fact of what they'd witnessed. By the mid-1970s, the story had spread through Hong Kong's martial arts community. It wasn't talked about in newspapers or magazines. It lived in dojos, on film sets, in the back rooms of tea houses where old practitioners gathered to trade memories. You heard about the time Bruce lifted Sammo? One hand, 8 seconds. I know someone who was there. After Bruce Lee's death in 1973, the story took on new weight. It became one of many pieces of evidence used to explain who he was, not the movie star, not the icon, but the practitioner. The man who could make the impossible look effortless. Sammo himself was asked about it in interviews. He never denied it. He never exaggerated it. He simply confirmed what others had said. It happened, he'd say, exactly the way people describe it. And then he'd move on. By the 1990s, the story had reached martial arts schools across Asia, Europe, and North America. Instructors used it as a teaching tool, not to worship Bruce Lee, but to illustrate a principle. That technique transcends size. That understanding defeats assumption. Students in Beijing heard it. Practitioners in London repeated it. Dojos in Sao Paulo made it part of their curriculum. And still, the story never changed, because the people who were there, those who stood in that cramped second floor, room on Portland Street, never let it become fiction. They protected it, not because they wanted to build a myth, but because they wanted to preserve a truth. In 2018, a documentary filmmaker tracked down one of the original students, an old man now living in Vancouver. When asked if the story was real, he smiled. People always ask that, he said. They think it's too perfect, too clean. But that's how it happened. Bruce didn't struggle. Sammo didn't resist. It was just inevitable. He paused, looking past the camera, as if seeing the dojo again. 8 seconds, that's all it took. And every one of us in that room became different people afterward. The story didn't need to be louder. It didn't need drama or conflict or a villain. It just needed to be true. And it was.